Good morning, everybody, and welcome back. It's so nice to see that you've all come back for the second day. We hope you had a lovely evening in Paris, but you can't fail to have a lovely evening in Paris, can you? So we have 3 panels this morning, and I just wanted to let you know that the coffee break will be after the second panel, and then we're aiming for lunch at sort of 1:15-ish perhaps, depending on how we get along. So that's the structure of the day. And I shall pass the microphone directly back to the chair of this panel, Barbara.
Thank you very much, Kevin. I hope everybody enjoyed yesterday and had a nice evening in this very romantic city, I have to say. So it's great to be here. So the first panel session today is on resale and royalties, rethinking authors' rights in the second-hand book market. Now, this is something in the UK, as you heard yesterday, that we've had some experience on, but we've got some, I think, very interesting research to listen to the scale, I think you would say, of the issues, certainly in France. But we'd very much like to make this a Q&A. I mean, do feel free to ask any questions. And we hope to come out with some conclusions as to what the next steps are for the IAF and also for second-hand book sales, the book market and the resale and royalties, and what the next steps are. So I'm hoping that we will enjoy a nice journey on what's been done so far, what we're looking at, what the research says, and then finding some conclusions to go forward. So we're going to start off with Geoffroy from SOFIA, who is going to be presenting some research that has been undertaken, and I think is quite breathtaking, I have to say. So I'm hoping that this is something that we can all learn from and perhaps think about how it might also relate into our own countries as well. So I'm going to hand over to Geoffroy.
Thank you, Barbara. Hello, everyone. Welcome in Paris. Welcome to the land of English with a French accent. Amy Chua, an American writer, once said, "Do you know what a foreign accent is? It's a sign of bravery." God bless her. Take it as a sign of my bravery. The second-hand book market in France has experienced several changes over the course of the last decade. These developments justify the need of this unprecedented study in order to assess and try to understand them in a general economic context of growth of second-hand goods. The objective was to provide professionals and public authorities with a comprehensive overview of the second-hand book market in France. The results of this survey, published in April 2024 and available on the SOFIA website, clearly express the economic stakes it now represents for the industry. The loss of income for authors and book publishers caused by the current volume of the second-hand market, which does not remunerate the creation of the books in question, should incite the entire industry of book professionals to collectively reflect, in tandem with public authorities, on intelligent and balanced solutions that would not prevent the second-hand market from continuing to grow, but in ways that would not penalize authors and book publishers. Okay. This study was based on 5 topics: quantitative approach, buyers, copies, amounts, a study on economic models, an analysis of the online offer, a survey of bookstores, and a qualitative approach on resellers. I will emphasize my presentation only on the points 1 and 5. The quantitative approach, it's okay. Quantitative approach. The second-hand book market is growing faster than the new book market in virtually all publishing sectors in terms of number of buyers, number of copies purchased, and amounts spent. It's plus 30% in 10 years. Today in France, one book buyer out of 4 also buys second-hand books. On the left side, you have the development of the number of new book buyers with a decrease of minus 5% to minus 10%. We have 2 statistic sources. And on the right side, you have the development of the second-hand book buyers, plus 30% to plus 40% in the past 10 years. Today, one book bought out of 5 is a used book. I think if you have only one figure to remember from this presentation, it's this one. 20% of the French book market is now a second-hand book market. It's plus 30% to plus 50% in the last 10 years. The second-hand book market estimate is at least, and it's really a minimum, 350 million euros, and the growth has been from plus 70% to plus 80% in the last 10 years. The average price of a second-hand book is 3 times lower than a new book. The average price of a new book is quite stable from the 10 past years, as it is for the second-hand book price, but the difference remains the same, 3 times lower for second-hand book prices. This phenomenon mainly concerns literature. Today, more than half of the used copies purchased in 2022 were literature. It is twice as much as the proportion in the new book market. Today, one contemporary novel bought on 4 is a second-hand book. A detective novel bought of 2 is a second-hand book. 50% of the detective novel market in France is second-hand book. One fantasy or sentimental novel bought out of 3 is a second-hand book, and one teen or youth novel out of 4. If we look at the trends over the past 5 years, on the left you have the second-hand book, on the right the new book market. The number of buyers, the increase is 11%, and in the same time the new book market decreased from 9%. Speaking of number of copies purchased, it's plus 38% for the second-hand book market, while in the same time it was only plus 11% for the new book market. And in terms of amount spent, it's 49% increase for the second-hand book market, while it was only 13% more for the new book market. So today we have, for the second-hand book market, 9 million buyers, 80 million copies, 20% of the market, and an estimate of 350 million euros. It's quite 10% of the book turnover. What is interesting is to have a look at make a focus on some publishing sectors. I hope you can see the figures, but it's only speaking about the number of copies purchased and compare between 2018 and 2022. So the last 5 years when we were publishing the study. And you can see, there is only one exception, but you can see that for all the publishing sectors, the increase for second-hand book is much more than the increase for new book. If you look at contemporary novels, detective novels, fantasy novels, romance novels, the difference is quite the same, but it's always much more for the second-hand book than for the new book. And sometimes, like detective novels, it's plus 40% for second-hand book, and at the same time, it's minus 14% for the new book. But there are some very huge increase, like young adult novels or children's novels. The increase for second-hand book, it's much more than 130%, while at the same time, it was stable or decreasing for the new book market. If you look at comics, it's a huge increase for the second book market for comics, even if the new book market is doing well with a plus 30%. And the only exception in this panel, it's the mangas. maybe mangas are too recent to be on the second-hand book market, and the mangas market is doing very well between 2018 and 2022, with a plus 200% in the new book market, but it's really the exception to the rule. And for human and technical sciences, it's a pity, because it's as for the second-hand book market and for the new book market, it's a decrease on the past 5 years. To explain it, we can say there has been in France, but I think it's the same for other countries, a double paradigm shift. First, since the internet boom, a buyer of second-hand books can now have access to almost all very, very recent books, and in a very good condition, at a price which is 30% to 50% lower than the price of the new books, and to almost all in-commerce or out-of-commerce books. The internet represents only one new book bought out of 5, but more than one used book bought out of 2. Internet clearly changed the game with new actors like Rakuten, like Momox, like Amazon, and so on. But there has been a second paradigm shift. After the development of these online sales platforms, we are seeing the development of platforms that allow commercial exchanges between consumers. And the example in France, the most famous is Vinted. Then I would give you some key points of the observation we have made about practices and behavior of buyers and resellers of second-hand books. Talking about the buyers, profiles are very, very similar. Profiles of the second-hand book buyers are very, very similar to the profile of the buyers of new books. There is no significant sex difference. 43% men and 57% women. It's quite the same for the new book market. There is no significant age difference between new and used buyers. The main age range for the second-hand book, sorry, still remain one word in French. The main age range for the second-hand book is 35-44 years old. If you really want to find a difference, it's another representation of higher socio-professional categories among second-hand book buyers. And it was really not intuitive that it would have been this way. Talking about motivations, the motivations to buy second-hand books are mainly economic. It has been quoted by 76% of second-hand book buyers, and very, very secondary and environmental. It has been quoted by only 33% of the second-hand book buyers. So the main motivation is to buy more books with a lower price. One point to remember is that 25% of second-hand book buyers buy exclusively for themselves. It means that 75% of second-hand book buyers buy second-hand books for someone else, and sometimes even to make a gift. I think that some years ago, nobody offers a second-hand book as a gift. So it changed, the mood with this has changed. Previously, you will find a second-hand book by chance. From now on, the purchase is premeditated. 56% of new and second-hand buyers start by looking to see if the book they want to buy is available or not as a second-hand book. And 64% of the buyers frequently compare prices among second-hand books. And it's possible because now you have many tools that are available. Like you can put an alert on the website and you know when the book you're looking for is available in a second-hand book. You can have a website that compare prices from one website to another website. So it's a kind of industrialization of this market. And it was not this way before. And on the opposite, nearly half of second-hand books buyers often buy second-hand books when they originally thought they would buy new ones, mostly by opportunism. you want to buy a new book, you go to a website and they tell you that they have also a second-hand book. So by opportunism, you buy the second-hand book. And sometimes by necessity, when the title is, you are looking for is out of commerce. So there is a high volatility of attachment to the new compared to the second-hand book. It's comparable to integrating between pocket and large format. You are looking for a large format book, and you see it exists also in a pocket format, so you buy the pocket, and when you want to buy a new book and you see there is a second-hand book, you buy the second-hand book. So there is, as there is an industrialization of the market, there is a professionalization of the second-hand book buyers. And to end, small words about the resellers. 40% of French people resell books. The average age is 38. It was 43 for the buyers, so the resellers are a bit younger than the buyers of the second-hand books. But for 66% of the resellers, it's less than 10 books by year and less than 15 euros of income. So people don't resell a lot of books, but there are more and more to do it. So there is more and more titles that are available because of this. In 2022, 30% of resellers have sold more books than in 2021, and there were 50% to say that when they were under 35. So it's a dynamic behavior that we can see in the way that you resell more and more books each year. 40% of second-hand buyers resell books that they have already bought in second-hand. So we speak about second-hand books, but we should speak about third-hand books or maybe fourth-hand books in this case. As a conclusion, so there is a double paradigm shift, an immediate availability of all recent books, a greater premeditation of second-hand purchase, a generalization of the second-hand practice, and a lack of remuneration for authors and publishers that we can call, I think, a prejudice, and for which we have to find a solution. When a book is sold, there is a remuneration for publishers and authors. When a book is discounted, there is a remuneration. When a book is loaned by a library, there is remuneration. When you copy a book, a print copy or a digital copy, there is a remuneration. Why is there still no remuneration when you resell a book? Thank you.
Wow, thank you for that, Geoffroy. I have to say, it's, I think in life you notice that there's a lot of second-hand bookshops or charity shops or Amazon and other platforms to sell second-hand books, but you don't really think about the scale of it. So the one thing that I've learned today is not to write detective novels, because I'm not going to make a living from that. And as we all know, as for writers, it's very difficult to make a living anyway. So I think that's actually, I found that quite emotive and emotional if you think about the life cycle of a writer, how difficult it is to make money. And I think your final comments there about where the income streams come from for writers, and yet we've got this huge, well, I would say it's almost on par with AI. It's like theft from authors, isn't it? And because they're not making money from the reuse of their work. And personally, I find that we've got a train station that I get off very close to my home, and they've got a whole load of books, and it's like, if you want to take a book, just put another book back. And I'm just like, no, you can't do that. You know, the author is not getting paid. My husband was the worst one. He used to get a book, very current book, and when he'd read it, he'd leave it on the train for somebody to pick up. And so I find myself, had I not been in this world, I wouldn't have actually thought about it as theft from the author. And I feel like, you know, you see the odd red telephone box in London full of books, and, you know, you can just go along and help yourself. And you feel like there should be some kind of educational piece somewhere saying, make a donation to the authors, or something whereby people can do the right thing. Because I think I think people do genuinely want to do the right thing, but they want to do it as cost effectively as possible. I'd also say that I'd be very upset if I got a second-hand book as a gift. Just in case anybody has any thoughts, it wouldn't be plan A, and I would think very, very badly of you, because again, my first thought would be the author should be getting paid, and they get paid poorly enough, you know, for being an author anyway. So, so I think there's an issue of fairness here. I think there's also a bit of an issue of education, and I don't know about you, but I certainly felt very educated by some of these large numbers coming across in black and white for us to see that this is actually a bigger issue than I certainly gave it credit for. And I'm coming from a country where we have in fact tried a route, not a structured route, I have to say, with regard to second-hand books. But I'm going to hand over to Richard now, who will give the kind of the author share, which is the kind of branding that we had for this initiative that was in partnership with the Society of Authors and a couple of second-hand booksellers. But I'm going to hand over to Richard to tell you our story so that you can see how something can happen, what the constraints are, etc. And then hopefully we can then come on to what some of the solutions might be. Richard.
Barbara, is this on? Yep. Morning, everyone. I can only really echo what Barbara said in relation to Geoffroy's presentation. I think perhaps in all of our minds we think of second-hand books as more of a shadow market to the sort of original sale. It's actually looking more like a mirror of the commercial market, and it's even more of an anomaly, as Geoffroy listed at the end there, that this is completely outside of any remuneration system, which we know at ALCS from having done successive surveys of our members. Authors' earnings are in a sort of death spiral, really. There's been a 60% decline in the last 15 years. So any markets that are leaving us completely unremunerated, despite being significantly commercial, is clearly something we have to address. So as Barbara said, we have some experience in this area, and I think after all those amazing numbers, I can offer you a bit of a narrative in terms of the experience that we had in the UK in this area. And it began probably about 12, maybe even 15 years ago, with a writer who was one of our members who bought a large barn in the West Country and filled it with books, which he ingeniously entitled Book Barn. And it was a massive, it was a sort of landmark on the road almost. It was a stopping off point for people to browse this amazing collection of secondhand books. And then he had the bright idea, well, maybe I could do something and give something back to authors. And he approached us. And out of that conversation, we had our first stab at a sort of resale royalty, whereby he agreed that based on his sales figures, a small percentage would be put aside for authors. And he would send us the data on the sales, and we would essentially take the lump sum and subdivide it by the sales data, which would give each author a small, in quotes, royalty for the resale. It was a great idea. In practice, I think it faltered a little bit because of scale. So the amount in the pot and the amount of books being sold meant that once you did that subdivision of the money, the actual amount to each author was quite small, almost decimal points of pence in some cases. I think it's fair to say as well that with voluntary schemes, which is the kind of thing that we've so far had experience of, like most things in life, there's a transaction involved. So while he was setting this up because he was a member of our community, he was an author, I think he was also interested in how it could be part of his brand, part of his ethical selling, in effect. And so I think if the story you're trying to tell is I'm putting something back, I'm giving something to authors, but if in reality their stake in it is a few pence, the story doesn't quite, it's not satisfying, it doesn't quite work. So I think that was our first lesson, that you have to scale this up really to make it work. So if we move forward 10, 12 years, we then found ourselves talking to a much larger bookseller called World of Books, which probably after Amazon, I'd say by scale, is one of the dominant players in the UK. And we essentially revisited the original scheme, actually with the same, with Book Barn as well. They were the second partner in the scheme. And we fixed on a lump sum in the first year, which was £200,000. And this was in and around the time of COVID. So a lot of authors were struggling then with diminishing earnings from things like visits and book festivals and things that they got subsidiary income from. So we worked with the Society of Authors in the UK on the basis that 75% of the pot would go for individual distribution and 25 into the Authors Contingency Fund, which is a general fund for the well-being of authors in the UK. So we sort of set out some broad terms of engagement for the scheme. And I think from our lesson the first time around, one of the things we tried to look at a floor and a ceiling for payments, because clearly, unless you cap payments, you could have a replication of the commercial market where the best sellers sort of scoop most of the money out of the pool. And what World of Books were very interested in, I think it's a peculiarity perhaps of the second-hand book market, was that they wanted to reward people whose books sold at the highest prices. In other words, a metric around scarcity value. So if you go into most charity shops and look at the books for sale, you will see the best-selling authors there. Because as Barbara said, there's that sort of turnover of titles. So they wanted the resale scheme to reflect the resale market. So we had to configure it in a way that the pricing of the book was reflected in the resale. Again, if you've got a relatively small pot, and even at 200,000, the more complexities you build into a system, the more you're spending on admin, effectively, and that is a cost to this. So I think the punchline to all of this will be scale, exactly as Geoffroy has said. But I think hopefully this gives some insights into the practicalities of what you have to do to get from a sum of money to putting it into the pocket of an author. The scheme has run for about 3 years now, I think. And if I go back to the idea of a transaction, what's in it for us, what's in it for them? I think it's fair to say that even with the larger sum in the pot, and even with our best endeavours on social media to generate positive feedback from authors saying, we're really behind this, it's a great idea, we're really glad to be working with this vendor, I think it's probably the case that even at 200,000, the impact wasn't quite sufficient to really deliver the PR opportunity that I think the vendor was looking for. And they're in a competitive space themselves, and I think they style themselves as an ethical seller. And they talk a lot about the circular economy. But as Barbara said, there's different versions of that, but some of them work better for authors than others. So in the end, they took the decision that they would rather perhaps achieve their CSR goals by funding awards and things like that. So they've moved away from the scheme. We've since started conversations with another setup called bookshop.org. I think they're solely working in the UK, but I don't know if they've reached out any further than that. Essentially, their model is to really put the spotlight on independent booksellers, because that's a bit like public libraries, a bit of a diminishing breed in the UK. And essentially their model is that if you want to buy a book, you don't just go straight to Amazon and find the lowest price. You actually find the book and through the platform identify your local independent bookstore. They will then order it for you, you'll buy it from them, they'll deliver it. And within this sort of more ethical take, I guess, on the sort of platform selling of books, they've now latched onto the idea of a resale payment for writers. They call it Book Loop, and you can probably Google that and find a few details about it. It only started last summer, so it's early days, and we haven't yet seen any data on the second-hand sales. But it's a sophistication, I think, of Barbara's husband leaving his book on the train, in that you can look at your shelves and there's a widget on their website where you can scan the barcode. It will give you a price instantly that it would resell that book for. So this market is, the professionalization, as Geoffroy said, of secondhand books is now becoming democratized to individuals who can start selling their own bookshelves without leaving the house. So we wait to see if that will be a viable solution or not. My sense, after having done this a couple of times, is that the two failings are lack of scale, because we need enough money to make the payments meaningful, viable. And it is, if you make the scheme fair, you make it more complicated. And that means the admin within the administering body like ALCS has to be paid for somehow. And the other thing I'd say is we've done all this on a voluntary basis, and I'm sure we all bear the scars of many battles over the year. It's fighting the good fight for authors without rights. So I think we need something underpinning this, given the scale of the market as it is now. We need something regulatory, something legal, something substantial, rather than just saying, come on guys, do the right thing. So I think internationally, there's definitely a cause here that we can get behind. And I think when Kevin talked yesterday about clinics, I think we could very usefully look at this, perhaps share our experiences, good practice, and perhaps find more of the kind of booksellers out there internationally who also want to be part of these schemes, and perhaps make common cause with them in our advocacy efforts to get something formal and regulatory behind these efforts. I can't compete with Geoffroy's stats and figures, but I'll give you a couple of numbers from a bit of work that we did last year, having done our voluntary schemes and looking at, you know, the elephant in the room, I think was the phrase I used yesterday, with Amazon as the linchpin of the market, not necessarily as a vendor, but as a facilitator and as a provider of the tools that the other vendors need. And they do make, as they do with all of their services, they make a business out of facilitating commerce on their platform. And so we got some economists to sort of play around with numbers and do what economists do. And they found that their best estimate of the benefit to Amazon from facilitating secondhand book sales in the UK was 100 million for UK sales, and it went up to about 220 if you put international exports in there as well. So even 1% of the UK would give you 1 million, which I think that is probably somewhere around the bare minimum based on our experiences to be able to administer a half-decent scheme. So I thought that was, we didn't put that in because we're targeting Amazon in any way with this, but I think it's more just an educational piece. That with a market that is now so significant, you have to look at it in the round and see where bits are being siphoned off and perhaps build that into your solution that you ultimately advocate for.
Well, thank you very much, Richard. So I think we've seen the bad and perhaps I wouldn't say the ugly. I'm sorry, Richard. Hopefully we're gonna get on to some good in a minute about where we go from, so that we have all the good, the bad, and the ugly there. So I think that there's a few strands that we're pulling out already. I mean, one I think is for us all to educate ourselves around this issue, based on the fact that I think they're frightening statistics that you've shown. Then we've heard about a voluntary scheme and what we've learnt from that as to how viable these things are, and also thinking about what the intent of those who are engaging with this is. So you mentioned World of Books and you know, the sustainability side of this. I'm just thinking about the fact that when we're talking about Amazon, they can manipulate things around so that you can add monies to charities and things like that. Why couldn't you have on the second-hand books donation to the author, something along those lines? I have no idea what the the backstory of that would be about how that would get administered. But I'm just thinking about the fact that I'm sure that there are 100 different ways that we could try and approach this, but probably a common way of doing something would kind of benefit us all if we had the same idea and we're pushing forward together on this. But I do think initially it's us educating ourselves about how big a problem this is in your country, because I have to say I had no idea of the scale until we have that work today. So thank you very much for undertaking that. So we're going to go on now to Florence-Marie, who's going to give us some ideas going forward and what we could be doing. And then at the end of that, perhaps we could have either a Q&A or a discussion about how we take things forward. So over to you, Florence.
Morning, everybody. I'm a legal advisor, and that's why it will be a bit legally. And about the French perspective on fair remuneration in the used book market, we noticed that a few years ago that this annual growth of this market was too huge and was very huge. And at the expense, of course, of the authors and publishers, also all of the entire book chain, because if you don't sell books, it will be a big prejudice for everyone and everybody. SOFIA studies notice that 60% of used book purchases are made over the internet. Then it's very, you have also the French, the bookseller on the scene, or if you on the river, or in the sometimes in the booksellers in the town. But the big parts of the market is there. Suppliers such as Amazon, Rakuten, Vinted, and others. They offer used book alongside new books as you see at prices below the retail price. And in France, as you know, maybe you know, there is a fixed price legislation, and it doesn't apply to used books. And when you sell a book, it's for a writer, it's easy, you get 10% of a fixed price, and you can get money and remuneration. In that case, authors and publishers and the syndicate of the National Syndicate of Publishers get a new decree, because we have also a médiateur du livre, and they noticed a few years ago that it's too much to get on the website the same books at the new books and like a new book, you know, and it was the price is below, and they obtain a decree in June 23rd to get the obligation that second-hand book suppliers must mention it's a second-hand book. And it's very important to get the first regulation we had in this country. And authors, of course, and publishers representative have asked to set up a fair remuneration. It came just after the studies, but it was in the air at that time, 2 years ago. And that's why I'm going to speak about the regulation, if it's possible. Oh, sorry. Yes. You know, there is a huge principle of exertions of a distribution right. We speak about distribution right. It's not communication right, not reproduction right, but it's the distribution rights who prevents to prohibit the resale on the second-hand book market. Then this, it means that once a copyright holder has authorized the sale or distribution of a copy of a work, they no longer have the exclusive right to control further sales or distribution of that particular copy. It means it works on the UC market, but also in the US, and you had this kind of right. It's also recognized in the WIPO copyright treaty in 1996, but it's a different meaning because there is conditions could have been affected the distribution right. But in the Article 4 in the directive of 2001, there is no condition. The distribution right shall not be exhausted within the community in the respect of the original or copies of a work, except where the first sale or over transfer of ownership in the community of that object is made by the right holders of with his consent. When we see that the first sale doctrine that you know in the US or elsewhere, maybe I don't know in the Asian country, but I think it's similarly. But in Europe, it's a European rule which made facilitate the free movement of goods on the market. Then it's really a limitation of your copyright or offer right. However, there are few exceptions and no limitations, what I said, of a doctrine of, we talk about the artist's resale right, which exists in France in 1920, in the 1920s, has been put in France. But nowadays it's a directive in 2001, and it's all over except in the US market, but I think you have it in England, of course. And this artist resale right is about original work of art. It's not for exemplary. It's maybe on the 8, maybe less exemplary publishing edition of an object, for example. But rental and lending rights shall not be exhausted by any sale or other act of distribution of originals and copy of copyrighted work. And it's in the directive of 2006, but it was also in the directive of 1992. So those rights are not concerned by this exception doctrine. And we'll get also for the services online. But we have a very special conclusion in the ruling of software. It means the use of software. It was in 2012. And it was a huge ruling because it extended the judge considering that they could extend the exhaustion to software resale online. And this debate, it concerns, we did in France, we had the Conseil de la propriété littéraire artistique. It's a council with all the copyright holders, and we thought about this ruling. And we did a report, and we said we don't want this extension to communication, to distribution online of books, for example. And it happens with Tom Cabinet in 2019, and the judge stopped this ruling, and they were limited only to software. It's, of course, a digital books market is not a concern, but this doctrine of a first sale doctrine, it's a communication right. Then communication, normally this first sale doctrine concerns only books in physical or material books, material copyrighted works. And recently, we had this topic with the private copy levies. It was in 2021 after the COVID. We noticed that there is a lot of recognition of iPhones, tablets, and also laptops. And we get a debate about can we put a levy on this recognition iPhone. Of course, the circular economy were defending the way that is the first sale on the European community, and it's an existed right, then it's a reproduction right. But we get from the legislator and also from the Ministry of Culture the support that we can do it, and we did. And some of us countries did also the private copying levies on recognition works. Why? Because why those rights are specific? Yes, they are specific because it's rights of compensation. They compensate for a loss, and private copying is very the compensation from a loss. And in that case, it's the loss of income. It's caused by the private exception. And for the right to lend books in France, for example, it's authorized in France in return for remuneration, because it's also an exemption. But there is a compensation of loss. We don't forbid we allow the lend to lend. We allow to copy in certain conditions for private copying and use. But we have this arm, and in return, we have this remuneration. Resale rights is intended also to compensate the artists for any loss of earning between the first and subsequent sales. We know about that. And what I thought, and what also authors and publishers thought, it's maybe we could get something similar. This, yes, bills, I said that bills are in progress, and they are in progress, just in progress, but authors and publishers representative are looking for a compulsory legal scheme. We talk about the voluntary contribution, and we have this talk at the board of SOFIA, because of course we have been approached by suppliers who would like to make a directly contribution for authors. But what we saw in the board with SOFIA is authors and publishers, and they said, no, we want something more, because we want something very hard law, not software, not soft law, something we can get a regulation, because otherwise it won't be, like you said, a very small incomes, and it's not enough for our market and for us. And we have three positions defended by authors, the Société Générale Lettres, or the national representative of publishers. The first one is tax on the resale of second-hand books. This one has been, we had a draft of a bill. I don't know how it's going on, but it has been deposed maybe in October of 24. But it's a contribution of a turnover of online used books, only online used book, and it would be the estimate could be of a percentage would be arrested by the Ministry of Culture, for example, by a commission. And this tax exists in other sectors, not for second-hand music, but such as streaming tax. And the streaming tax, maybe you'd hear about that. It's in France 1.2, and it's redistributed because it's a tax, it's an impôt made by the government, and it goes to the Centre National of Music, and they get 9 million euros, and they redistribute to promote the music and to help artists and musicians. And we thought that such allocation could also be benefit to the authors and publishers, for example, to help pension funds for authors who are already a share came from the public lending right in France, but also for promotion for books, or it could go directly for authors and publishers. The disadvantage of this one, because we had a lot of debate in France, and it was announced during the last book fair in Paris in March last year. And Macron, the President Macron, was very willing to put this tax on this market, and he announced it at the book fair. But the problem was it wasn't supported by the opinion, the public opinion, by consumers, but also there is a campaign from the recycling suppliers who said it's not ecologic, it's a tax again, and it was a bit unpopular also, and we did have the political support. But the second argument would be a media chronology, as it exists maybe in your countries for films, audiovisual works. We wait after movies has been in the theater nearly 6 months or 1 year. It depends about the TV. And this media chronology is more influenced by the Authors Guild, and it could be after the first sale, 6 or 12 months. We wait to put the second-hand books, books commercialized. This disadvantage, it's a legal limit to the exertion of doctrine. Then I think it would be difficult to plead that we just put a limit, and this one could be maybe we could have a difficult right debate. The and very difficult to control also. And we need, yes, I'm not sure, we are, yes, this is one of the arguments. And the third one will be a fair remuneration. As I said before, it's not a limitation, it's like a limitation, it's not an exception, the doctrine, first doctrine, but we need to complete and to say, and we have already have these studies, that 25 or 20% of the books market is goes to this for it's create a big and huge prejudice for authors, and it could be a compensation like we did for books. Actually, it's 6% on the sale price, and the 6% is reversed by the booksellers to SOFIA. And it's an example, but it could be less or more. I don't know. This is personally what I think. We have directly we did already this management with booksellers in France, and for kind of compensation, we believe also that we need the support of other member states of the Union, for European Union, because we can do it, but do it alone on only the national market could be very specific right, like what we said in Latin, sui generis right, a new right out of the blue, but we need something to be supported by others, by you, for example. That's why we talk about this topic today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So we've seen what the problem is. We've seen how problematic it can be if you don't have the right structure around it. And we have some potential solutions here. I wanted to make a couple of comments here because adaptability was one word that sprung into my mind, especially when you see the changes that have made with regard to reconditioned items and getting levies for the use on there. So there's kind of precedents there already. I have to say, in the overall scheme of things, this seems a lot easier to resolve than AI. So, which I'm sure we'll be hearing about later, but it seems a lot more concrete and people could understand it more than this vague notion of texts and pictures and all going off into the ether. So I think from an emotional point of view, I'm surprised that you know that you're saying that it wasn't, when Macron made an announcement, it wasn't particularly popular. But then again, as soon as you have a tax on anything and call it a tax, nothing is very popular anyway. I think also the governments want evidence when they're going to make any changes, and so I think the work that SOFIA has done on this is very useful indeed. What I would say is, when we launched the author share in the UK Parliament, MPs and peers liked very much that we had put an author's resale right on the map. They thought it was a great idea. Would they be so helpful if we said, well, actually, we want legislation around this? I'm not so sure, because that means a bit of effort, and it might not be as popular as we would all like. The other thing that kind of came into my mind from what we've heard today is people are buying second-hand books a lot of the time around the sustainability and keeping the world churning and not using up resources. But those same people, if they currently don't really have a choice of paying the author, they've got to make that decision about whether they're going to buy a new book and the author gets paid. Whether that hits their consciousness, I don't know. But they know that they are saving the planet if they buy second-hand books. How do we go about finding a way that they can do both? And I think that's our challenge. So I think we need to think about next steps, and I think you've provided a number of different options of thinking about it. I would also say that the French government is way more well disposed towards creators, certainly, than the UK government is. Just come and have a listen to what they're saying in our parliament, and you'll realise that we are just commodities. So I do think that there's a different approach to creativity in Europe that you don't necessarily see in every country of the world. And I know that we've got people outside of Europe in here, all struggling in different ways to protect and promote and get new authors' rights. So I think it's a big ask and a big campaign. I'm obviously going to throw something in Kevin's direction with regard to what the International Authors Forum can be doing here, and I'm sure Kevin will have already had 10 million different thoughts about how this could be taken forward, because I know Kevin really well. But we do, the strands that I've got out of this are education, perhaps some kind of working group or clinic on this, maybe some kind of survey for us to see what's out there and what we're doing, if anything. And I suspect most of us in this room are not doing an awful lot about secondhand books. But what I wouldn't mind is, I can't actually see too many of you, but apart from the discussion that we've had up here, is there any other country in this room today that is doing anything on secondhand book sales and trying to do anything to make sure the authors get remunerated? Okay, I'm scouting around and I am not seeing one. And which country? Sweden, always ahead of the game. Okay, so that's good. And perhaps at the next IAF, or maybe if there's a clinic or a working group, we can approach you to be part of that so that we can understand your experience and what you're doing. So that's good. There is at least one other country. Any others at all? Yeah, hang on. There's
Always a room for you. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear it, Geoffroy. Now, first of all, thank you to Florence-Marie for an excellent legal presentation. On the resale right and on what we can do for authors, which I would personally fully support in this field, because the situation is quite dramatic in any EU member state and outside the EU, of course. The idea of a resale right is a very attractive one, but there is an issue here, and it's a big legal issue, and this is an elephant in the room. It's not only the phenomenon itself, there is a legal issue, and a serious one. The distribution right, including the exhaustion of the distribution right, is fully harmonized at EU level, as the European Court has already said, which means that any national initiatives by member states in the EU are simply impossible in the field of the distribution right. So if you want a resale right or a new take on the distribution right or the non-exhaustion of the distribution right for second-hand books, you need to convince the European Commission to come up with an instrument like the resale rights directive that we have for artistic works, trying to convince the Commission today. I will talk about it in How to Boil a Frog later at noon, trying to convince the European Commission to do something for copyright today is asking an elephant to play chess, I think, right now. Best of luck with that. So the question, and I like the tax idea, the question is, what can national governments, and I'm talking about the EU because it's the legal system that I know best, what can national governments do outside the harmonized EU law on distribution? A tax is one idea, but I'm glad that Sweden took the floor, because the second thing that national governments can do is what Sweden and the Nordic countries have done for PLR, which is to set up a sort of resale right as a cultural subsidy mechanism outside copyright law. I think that is probably, alongside the tax, the best idea, the most concrete idea to take this one step further, because that's national cultural policy, and the European Commission has or the EU has very limited powers on that. So that's the first idea. Secondly, don't forget about competition law. We are talking about big platforms with a dominant market position. Amazon could be taken to court, but you could also ask your legislature to provide specific competition law legislation in case of second-hand books and the sale of second-hand books done online by platforms with not a tax, but a contribution by the platform
a financial contribution on the sale to be paid into a fund that would support authors. I think that's the second thing you can do. Third thing, and I'm going to stop with that because we don't want to make it too legal, but don't forget that moral authors' rights are not harmonized at EU. And we are going to talk, I'm going to talk a lot about moral rights. We are in France, the birthplace of moral rights. So don't forget them, because in moral rights, there is something called a contextual integrity right in most countries with moral rights. And contextual integrity means that an author can, from the outset, say what he wants to be done with his work. And he can oppose to any use of the work that is not compliant with the intention of the author. So we are looking at a kind of opt-out mechanism. We are going to talk a lot about opt-outs today as well, but you should talk to legal advisors in your countries whether or not an author or a collective organization can do something with an opt-out for the resale of second-hand books on commercial platforms. So I just wanted to compliment Marie-Florence's excellent presentations. I think taxation is one option, competition law is a second option, moral authors' rights is a third option, but the most successful and the most likely to be implemented, because it's not a tax, is a direct cultural subsidy by your state. So just.
Thank you very much, Kurt. And that does show you how complex the bigger picture really is. So thank you for that. Geoffroy, I know you'd like to...
No, but Kurt is right. There is no doubt that if we go along on this subject, it's fragile. We are probably not strong enough. But if we are all together, maybe we are stronger than the elephant. So it's yes, and a mouse can play chess. I think Mickey plays chess. But I want to add, of course, it's not popular. Of course, it's not intuitive. Of course, it won't be easy. That's why we want to do it. But it's not popular and it's not intuitive because we have to fight against ideas. Second-hand book is not more ecological than the new book market. When you sell a book in Paris to another person in Paris and the book goes by a warehouse in Germany with an individual transport, I'm not sure it's much more ecological. It doesn't encourage reading. We have seen in the survey, it's the same people that buy new books that buy second-hand books. It's the same readers. So it doesn't encourage reading. So we have to fight against these false ideas. And then I heard what you said, and I think there is two issue very important. First, the scale, and we want a huge scale. We want a huge amount because if it's not, it's only symbolic, and you can not live with only symbolic revenues. And if it's only voluntary, it has no end because it's not enough. It can stop at every moment, so it has to be mandatory. So, and the third thing is it's quite, there is solutions who are quite transparent for the buyer. If you add 10 cents, 20 cents to the price of a second-hand book, it doesn't change anything. And the buyer, there is no fixed price for the second-hand book. The buyer can add 10 cents or 20 cents to a book. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't change anything for the buyer. If you buy a book that is 20 euros and you can find it for 5 euros, the difference is the same if you buy it for 5.2. It doesn't change anything for you. So it's just a small amount, but if you multiply it by 80 millions of copies, then you have at the end 16 millions. 16 million euros is what we have in the public lending right in France, and it's not only symbolic in this way.
Very much, and thank you very much for taking me up on my sustainability credentials there. I think it's perception, though, that people think that they're doing the right thing, even if you look at the trail and it isn't quite so ecologically friendly. Does anybody have any questions? And I've seen Kevin. Oh, there are questions. Now, could we make them fairly quick based on the fact that Kevin is going to tell me off because we're already over time? Yeah. John,
Well, we're up next to talk about AI, so I'm just going to keep this going as long as we possibly can. The only thing I wanted to add, this was an amazing presentation and has really sort of focused my mind in terms of things to say back in Canada. But the one thing that I would add to these excellent suggestions is that we need to take back some of our vocabulary. The other side, the resistance to this idea, has better vocabulary, and they use it against us all the time. They talk about freedom and accessibility and world knowledge. We need to take those back and talk about ethical purchasing and support, rather than let's never use the word tax, and just talk about it in a much more positive way, I think.
Thank you, John. Any final, Kevin?
Thank you so much. I have learned such a great deal in this last hour. It's really fascinating. Totally agree with Barbara's list of next steps. I think probably the most significant of those is going to be some kind of a clinic or a working group. I'll give it some thought. And clearly I've got a few people in mind to join that before we take it public. The one thing I would add, unless anybody objects, is it seems to me that there's an opportunity here to create a momentum for the writer's resale right within WIPO, which addresses all member states, and which has been done very successfully over the last 10 years with the artist resale right and the public lending right. And that draws attention to this to member states and informs them. And that will help in a kind of positive circular way when you want to then go to your governments and copyright offices. So unless anybody objects, I would include that in the agenda for the working group / clinic. See no objections. Okay, so thanks. Those are the points I wanted to make.
Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. Any final comments, or are we all happy with what we've heard today? We know that there's a big mountain to climb in front of us. It is complex, and fortunately we have Kevin to solve the problem. So on that note, if you could give a round of applause for your panelists today. Thank you.